Shirley saw the flowers before she saw the woman, fresh white roses, with dewdrops still clinging to their petals. Someone had left them that morning. The problem was, no one visited that grave but her. For 3 years, she had come every 15th of the month, cleaning her son Lachlan's headstone with a damp cloth, pulling away the dry spinifex that the outback pushed between the cracks, always alone, always in silence. But today, kneeling before the concrete cross, was a young woman dressed in clothes that didn't belong in that town. Expensive clothes, city clothes, and clinging to her leg, a boy of about 3, looking at the headstone with eyes Shirley knew better than her own. They were Lachlan's eyes. The woman hadn't seen her arrive. She was weeping silently, her hand resting on the earth as if she wanted to touch something that was no longer there. What Shirley discovered in that cemetery knocked the ground out from under her. Because not only did that boy resemble her dead son, that boy did something only Lachlan did, a gesture no one could have taught him. If you know what it feels like to look at someone and see the person who's gone, leave a like right now, subscribe and hit the bell. Tell us which state you're watching from. But to understand what happened that morning, we have to go back 3 years. 3 years. 1,095 days. That was what separated Shirley from the last time she heard her son Lachlan's voice. Not his voice on the phone. That stopped months before the accident. The last real voice, flesh and blood, was when Lachlan said goodbye at the homestead door, a backpack on his shoulder and a red bandana tied around his neck. "I'm heading north, Mum, but I'll be back." He never returned. Shirley lived alone on a small homestead on the outskirts of a town that didn't even appear on road maps. Deep outback, red dust, vast sky, heavy silence. The homestead was 4 adobe walls, a corrugated iron roof that drummed when it rained, a wood-fired kitchen, and a yard where the chooks pecked among the saltbush. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and it had been Lachlan's. Every 15th of the month, Shirley would wake earlier than usual. She'd put on her clean dress, the dark blue one she only wore to town. She'd comb her gray hair into a tight plait, and before leaving, she always did the same thing. She'd open the drawer of her mother's old dresser. She'd take out a red bandana, faded by the sun and sweat. She'd unfold it carefully. She'd run her fingers over the fabric as if she could feel the warmth of the person who wore it, and then tuck it into her apron pocket. She didn't wear it. She kept it close. This March 15th, the path to the cemetery was drier than ever. It hadn't rained in weeks. The hot outback wind stirred up dust devils that got between her teeth. Shirley walked the 2 kilometers from the homestead without complaint, carrying a bucket of water, a clean cloth, and a bunch of wildflowers she'd cut from the edge of the dry creek bed. The town's cemetery wasn't like those in the cities. There were no high walls or iron gates. It was a rectangle of land fenced with barbed wire, where wooden and concrete crosses stood among the native scrub and gum trees. The oldest graves no longer bore names. The sun and wind had erased the letters, just as they erase everything in the outback. Lachlan's grave was at the back, near the largest gum tree, a grey concrete cross with his name hand-painted by Old Man Wally, the neighbor. Lachlan Evans, son of Shirley. May God keep him in his glory. Shirley saw the white roses from afar and stopped. The wind hit her face, and she had to squint, but it wasn't the wind that paralyzed her. It was those flowers, large white roses, with long stems and perfect cuts. Roses that didn't grow in any garden in this town. Roses that cost money. Roses someone had brought from far away. And then she saw the woman. She was kneeling in front of the grave, her back to Shirley. She wore a cream-colored dress that contrasted with the brown earth like a cloud fallen from the sky. Her dark hair fell loosely over her shoulders. Beside her, a leather handbag rested on a stone, and clinging to her right leg, half hidden, a small child looked at the concrete cross. Shirley felt her stomach clench. In 3 years, no one she knew had visited that grave. No relatives, because there were none left. No friends, because the ones Lachlan had in town had gone north just like him. No women, because Lachlan never spoke to her about any. Who was this woman? And why was she crying at her son's grave as if it belonged to her? Shirley advanced slowly. Her thongs made no sound on the loose earth. With each step, the details sharpened. The woman wasn't just crying, she was talking, whispering something Shirley couldn't quite hear. Her right hand was extended over the earth, fingers spread as if trying to reach something underneath. The child was small, 3 years old, maybe less. He had light brown skin, unevenly cut dark hair, and wore clean new clothes. Branded shoes, denim shorts without a single stain. In this town, 3-year-olds had grazed knees and dusty shoes before 8 a.m. This child wasn't from here. Shirley stopped 5 paces away. She cleared her throat. The woman jumped as if shot. She turned sharply, her eyes red and swollen, and Shirley saw her face for the first time. She was young, pretty, but with a sadness that aged her 10 years. "Who are you?" Shirley asked. Her voice came out harsher than she intended, but her heart was pounding, and when the heart pounds, the voice hardens on its own. The woman quickly stood up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She straightened her dress, searching for an answer that wouldn't come. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't know anyone would be here." "I come every month," Shirley said, unmoving. "I've been coming for 3 years, and in 3 years, I've never seen anyone here." The woman looked down. Her hands trembled. "Did you put those roses there?" Shirley asked, pointing to the bouquet. The woman nodded, without speaking. "Did you know my son?" The question dropped between them like a stone in a dry well. The woman opened her mouth, but what came out wasn't a word. It was a sob, a deep, old sob that seemed to have been held back for years. The woman tried. "Yes, I knew him." Shirley looked her up and down. The expensive clothes, the handbag, the fine shoes dusted with road grime. This woman didn't belong in this world. Lachlan was a laborer. He worked on construction sites interstate. How could a woman like this have known her son? Where had she known him from? But the woman didn't answer because at that moment, the child let go of his mother's leg and took 2 steps towards the grave. He knelt down, placed his little hand on the painted letters of the name Lachlan and said, with that small, clear voice children have when they speak enormous truths, "Here's Daddy. Isn't he, Mummy?" The world stopped. Shirley dropped the bucket. The water spilled onto the dry earth and disappeared in seconds, swallowed by the outback. But Shirley didn't look at the water. She looked at the child. She looked at those big, dark eyes with a sparkle she knew, as one knows one's own breath. They were Lachlan's eyes, not similar, not alike. They were the same eyes that had looked at her for 28 years, from the cot, from the table, from the homestead door the day he left. "What did that child say?" Shirley whispered. Her voice was no longer harsh, it was a thin thread. The woman grabbed the child and lifted him into her arms. Her eyes filled with panic. "It's not what you think. We have to go." "What do you mean, it's not what I think?" Shirley took a step forward. "That child just said my son is his father. Please, ma'am, explain yourself." I can't talk about this. It was a mistake to come." The woman started walking quickly towards the cemetery exit, clutching the child to her chest. Shirley followed her. But 6, 2, yeah, old legs can't catch. 3, 0, yeah, old ones. "Wait, don't take that child." And then it happened. The child, startled by the shouts, did something, a small, automatic gesture that he probably did 20 times a day without anyone paying attention. He took his right hand to his neck, closed it as if gripping something invisible, and pulled it down as if untying a knot. The bandana gesture. Shirley was rooted to the spot, her legs giving way. She had to grab the cross of a stranger's grave to keep from falling, because that gesture, that exact gesture, with the right hand, closing the fingers over the neck and pulling downwards, was not a common gesture. It wasn't something a 3-year-old learns at school or on television. It was the gesture Lachlan made every time he was nervous. From the age of 6, he would grab his bandana, pull it, loosen it, tie it again. A tick, a habit, something so uniquely him that Shirley could recognize it with her eyes closed, just by the sound of the fabric sliding. No one could have taught that child that. No one. Because the only people who knew that gesture were dead or standing there in the middle of an outback cemetery, watching a piece of Lachlan walk away in the arms of a stranger. Shirley heard a car engine starting on the other side of the wire fence. She saw the dust cloud rise on the dirt track and stood there with the red bandana in her pocket and the wildflowers discarded on the ground next to the empty bucket. The outback wind dried her tears before they reached her chin. But Shirley wasn't crying from sadness. She was crying because for the first time in 3 years, her son wasn't completely dead. Shirley didn't know how long she stood in that cemetery. It could have been 5 minutes or an hour. The outback has no clock, only sun, wind, and silence. And all 3 remained there, as if nothing had happened. She picked up the empty bucket, picked up the wildflowers from the ground, already wilting from the heat, and placed them on Lachlan's grave, beside the white roses the stranger had left. Her flowers looked poor next to those roses, small, dry, but they were what the outback gave her. And Shirley had never been ashamed of how little she had until today. Today, for the first time, she looked at her flowers and felt they weren't enough, that she wasn't enough, that there was an entire piece of her son's life she didn't know about. and that piece had just fled in a car with number plates she couldn't even read. She walked back to the homestead, her body heavy and her head throbbing. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on her neck. She reached her front door and sat on the concrete step without going inside. The Chooks approached her, expecting corn. Shirley ignored them. That's how Old Man Wally found her. Old Man Wally was the kind of neighbor who appears when needed without being called. 78 years old, widowed, his back bent from half a century of farm work, but with eyes that missed nothing. He came crossing the wire fence that separated the two homesteads with a tin of goat's milk in his hand, as he did every third day. "Shirley, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse than a ghost, Wally. I saw my son." Old Man Wally put the tin on the ground and sat beside her without asking permission. Shirley told him everything: the woman, the roses, the child, the eyes, the gesture. Old Man Wally listened without interrupting, which is the rarest and most valuable way to listen. When Shirley finished, the old man scratched his chin and said what any sensible person would say. "What if you're wrong? Eyes look alike. Shirley, gestures are copied. Sometimes you see what you want to see. I'm not wrong. How can you be so sure?" "Because that gesture can't be copied, Wally. That gesture was born with Lachlan. I saw it appear when he was 6, and I gave him his first bandana. No one taught him. It just came out, like hiccups. And that child did it exactly the same, with the same hand, with the same tug." Old Man Wally was silent for a long time, then nodded. "I saw a strange car parked on the bend of the old road this morning," he said slowly. "Black, fancy, the kind that never passed through here, not even by accident. It had Sydney plates. Sydney, 1,000 kilometers from that town where not even buses went." "Why didn't you tell me before?" Shirley asked. "Because a fancy car parked isn't news, woman. Now it is." Shirley got up from the step. She needed to think. And when Shirley needed to think, she went to one place. The town's church was an adobe room with a rusted iron cross on the roof. It had no pews, only plastic chairs someone had donated years ago. It had no stained glass or bell tower, but it had Father Michael, and that was more than enough. Father Michael was sitting in the back courtyard, mending a soccer goal net that the Sunday school children had broken. He was 70 years old, with gnarled hands of someone who had lived more with his body than his head, and a gaze that saw through walls. He had baptized Lachlan, given him his first communion, watched him go north, and performed the mass when his ashes were brought back. "Father, I need you to listen to me." Father Michael put down the net, took off his glasses, and looked at her. He didn't say, "Sit down." He didn't say, "Tell me." He just looked at her. That was enough. Shirley told him everything again, and when she finished, she awaited his verdict. Father Michael remained silent for a good while, then put his glasses back on as if he needed to see more clearly to say what he was about to say. "Shirley, you've been talking to a grave for 3 years. You tell it about your day, you bring it flowers, you ask forgiveness for things that don't need forgiveness. I never said anything because talking to the dead does no harm." He paused. "But now you have to decide if you're going to keep talking to the dead or if you're going to go look for the living." Shirley felt those words like a splash of cold water to the face. "I don't even know where to look, Father. You know it's Sydney. You know they have money. You know they have a child who looks like your son. That's more than you had this morning. And if I get there and they treat me like a stray dog..." Father Michael looked at her over his glasses. "Shirley, you've given birth alone, you've buried alone, and you've survived alone in an outback where even the snakes struggle. And you're afraid of a door?" Shirley didn't answer. There was no need. That night, sitting at the kitchen table with weak coffee in her hands, she made her decision. She took the tin box where she kept her money from the dresser drawer. She counted the notes. There was just enough for a one-way bus ticket to Sydney. God would see to the return trip. Before going to bed, she took the red bandana from her pocket and placed it on the pillow on the empty side of the bed. The side where Lachlan used to sleep when he was a child and was afraid of storms. "I'm going to find him, my son," she whispered in the dark. "I'm going to find that child." Outside, the outback was silent, but for the first time in 3 years, the silence didn't feel empty. Shirley had never been on a passenger bus. She knew the utility vehicles that took people to the next town, the cargo trucks, where she sometimes hitched a ride to the market, but a real bus with numbered seats and air conditioning, that was something from another world. Old Man Wally drove her to the Broken Hill terminal in his old ute at 4 a.m. The dirt track from the town to the sealed road took almost 2 hours, and Shirley didn't want to miss the 7 o'clock bus. "This will help you," Old Man Wally said as he parked in front of the terminal. He handed her a folded piece of paper. "My mate Furman at the turn-off servo. told me something. He says the black car stopped for fuel the same day you saw it at the cemetery. The driver asked him for directions back to the road to Sydney. Fermin asked where they were coming from, and the man said from the Eleanor family's place that the lady had wanted to make a stop before heading back. The Eleanors, Shirley etched that surname into her mind like a brand on cattle hide. Eleanor from Sydney, she repeated. That's all there is, woman. But in Sydney, the wealthy Eleanors can't be that many. Ask around. You know how to ask. Shirley put the paper in her apron pocket. Next to the bandana, she hugged Old Man Wally. The old man smelled of goat's milk and firewood, the smell of her world. A smell that, in a few hours, would be far away. If I don't come back in 3 days, feed my chooks, Shirley said. If you don't come back in 3 days, I'll come for you in Sydney, even if I have to ride a donkey, Old Man Wally replied. The bus left at 7 sharp. Shirley sat by the window with her shopping bag on her lap. Inside, she carried the bandana, a change of clothes, 4 bean tortillas wrapped in a cloth, a bottle of water, and Lachlan's photo from her dresser. It was an old photo from when he was 18, before he went north. He smiled with that shy smile he had, the red bandana around his neck, his eyes shining with plans and future. The journey lasted 14 hours, 14 hours of outback that transformed. First, the flat, dry land of the Northern Territory, the ghost gums like sentinels, the sky so vast it hurt to look at. Then the mountains of New South Wales, green on the peaks, bare on the slopes. Then the landscape changed. More cars, more houses, more advertisements, more noise. The outback gradually filled with people and concrete until it disappeared completely. Shirley watched everything through the window without blinking. She had never seen so many lights together. She had never seen buildings taller than 2 stories. She had never seen so many people walking at the same time without greeting each other. In her town, passing someone without saying good morning was an offense. Here, no one looked at anyone. The bus arrived in Sydney at 9 p.m. The terminal was a huge building that buzzed like a beehive. Shirley got off, her shopping bag clutched to her chest, and stood in the midst of people rushing in all directions. It smelled of diesel, fried food, and something else she couldn't identify. She later understood it was the smell of haste. Haste has a smell. It smells of sweat with perfume over it. That night, she slept on a bench at the terminal, not for lack of options, but because she had no money for a hotel and wasn't going to spend what little she had left on a roof when there were free benches. She folded her bag into a pillow, covered herself with her shawl, and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep, but she rested her body while her mind worked. The next morning, Shirley did what she knew how to do. Ask. She went to the newsagent at the terminal. She asked the man if he knew a wealthy Eleanor family in Sydney. The man laughed. Thousands of Eleanors, ma'am. Eleanor of what? Eleanor who has a daughter named, I don't know her name, young, pretty, dark hair, drives a big black car. You're describing half of Vaucluse, ma'am. Vaucluse. Shirley memorized that name. She also took a public bus to that area. The driver told her it was 40 minutes with no traffic. There was traffic. It took an hour and a half. But when the bus entered the streets of Vaucluse, Shirley understood why the woman from the cemetery dressed as she did. The houses weren't houses. They were fortresses, 3-meter walls with iron gates, gardens visible over the walls, green as if it rained every day, with trees pruned into shapes Shirley had never seen. Cars parked outside that cost more than her entire homestead. Chooks, kitchen, and Lachlan's memory combined. Shirley got off the bus and started walking. She went into a chemist and asked about the Eleanor family. The employee gave her a strange look and said he didn't know of any Eleanors around there. She walked 2 more blocks and asked at a stationery shop. The girl at the counter said there were some Eleanors in the neighboring suburb, but they were dentists, not builders. Shirley thanked her and kept walking. At the 3rd stop, a small shop with an old fan buzzing on the ceiling, she asked the lady at the counter if she knew the Eleanors. The Eleanors from the construction group? The lady asked with little interest. Shirley's heart raced. Construction. Lachlan was a laborer. He worked in construction. The pieces were slotting into place. Yes, those ones. Their house is on Sierra Madre Street, heading up towards the hill. It's the big house with the stone gate. You can't miss it. It's the biggest on the block. Shirley walked 20 minutes uphill. The Sydney sun was different from the outback sun. It wasn't dry and clean. It was humid, heavy, sticky. Her blouse clung to her back. Her thongs slipped on the smooth footpath, and then she saw it. The Eleanor house didn't have a barbed wire fence. It had a carved sandstone wall, sand-colored, taller than any wall Shirley had ever seen. A black iron gate with the surname forged in golden letters. Behind the wall, The tops of trees peeked out as if asking permission to leave. The sound of falling water could be heard. A fountain, a luxury, as alien to Shirley as the sound of the sea. To the right of the gate was a guardhouse with a security guard inside. A young man in uniform, with dark glasses and a look of professional boredom. Shirley stood on the opposite footpath. She looked at the gate, looked at the guardhouse, looked at her dusty thongs, her worn shopping bag, her dark blue dress. That was her best clothes in town, and here looked like a rag. She remembered Father Michael's voice. "And you're afraid of a door?" Shirley crossed the street, planted herself in front of the guardhouse, and knocked on the glass with her knuckles. The guard looked her up and down, without taking off his glasses. "What can I do for you, ma'am?" "I'm looking for the Eleanor family. I need to speak to the lady of the house." The guard looked at her again, this time more slowly. The thongs, the shopping bag, the calloused hands, the shawl. And Shirley saw the guard decide in that second that she didn't deserve to be there. "Do you have an appointment?" "No. Without an appointment, you can't. Have a good day." And he closed the guardhouse window. Shirley didn't move. She stood there under the Sydney sun, in front of a gate worth more than her entire life. But she didn't leave. Because behind that wall, somewhere in that house, was a 3-year-old boy who put his hand to his neck as if searching for a bandana he'd never had. And Shirley hadn't crossed the entire outback to be stopped by a pane of glass. But what Shirley didn't know was that behind that gate, there wasn't just a child with her son's eyes. There was a truth about Lachlan's death that would change her life forever. Shirley waited 3 hours. She sat on the opposite footpath under the scrawny shadow of a tree that the neighborhood gardeners kept pruned into a sphere. She didn't beg, she didn't talk to anyone. She just sat there with her shopping bag on her lap and her gaze fixed on the iron gate, like someone watching a crop, waiting for rain. The guard looked at her occasionally from the guardhouse. At first with annoyance, then with curiosity, and finally with that discomfort produced by people who don't leave when they should. At 11 a.m., the gate opened. The family didn't come out. A woman of about 40, in domestic service uniform, a white apron, and her hair tied in a net, came out. She was carrying a rubbish bag towards the bin on the corner. Shirley stood up. "Excuse me, ma'am." The employee took a step back, startled. "I won't hurt you," Shirley said with open hands, showing her calloused palms. "I just need a favor. I need someone from the house to listen to me. I've come a very long way." The employee looked at her with those eyes that instantly recognize people of her own class. She saw the thongs, the weathered hands, the clean but worn dress. She didn't see a threat. She saw someone like herself. "Who are you looking for? The lady of the house or her daughter? The young woman who has a small child?" "Miss Chloe doesn't receive visitors without Mrs. Eleanor's authorization," the employee said, lowering her voice. "And Mrs. Eleanor doesn't receive anyone she doesn't know. Tell her I came from the outback, that it's about her daughter and about a young man named Lachlan Evans." The employee frowned. The name didn't mean anything to her, but something in Shirley's face, something in the way she said that name, like someone uttering a prayer, convinced her. "Wait for me here. I don't promise anything." The employee went inside through the gate. Shirley sat down again. 15 minutes passed. 20. The sun rose, and the tree's shadow shrunk. Shirley took the water bottle from her bag and took a short drink. Less than half remained, and she didn't know when she could refill it. Then the gate opened again, but this time the employee didn't come out. Mrs. Eleanor did. Shirley knew who she was before she opened her mouth. Not by the name, but by the way she walked. She walked as if the world owed her an apology for existing. Straight back, chin up, short, precise steps on her heels that clicked against the stone of the driveway, like small hammer blows. Mrs. Eleanor was 64, but looked 55. Her hair was a perfectly dyed brown, her skin cared for with creams that cost more than Shirley's monthly groceries. Her nails painted a discreet pink. She wore immaculate white trousers and a pearl-colored silk blouse. On her wrist, a watch that sparkled in the sunlight. Everything about her spoke of control. Everything about her spoke of order. Behind Eleanor came the guard, who had now removed his dark glasses and looked ready for anything. Eleanor stopped 3 meters from Shirley. She didn't cross the gate. She stayed on the inside, as if the footpath were another country. "Are you the lady asking about my daughter? I am Shirley Evans, Lachlan Evans' mother." The name fell between them. Eleanor didn't blink, but Shirley saw the muscle in her jaw tighten. A second, half a second, enough to know that name was not unknown. "I don't know who Lachlan Evans is," Eleanor said. Her voice was firm, rehearsed. "And I don't know what you've been told, but my daughter has no connection with people from your background. From your background." Shirley heard those words and let them pass like the wind. They didn't hurt her. They informed her. "Ma'am, I saw your daughter 3 days ago at the cemetery in my town. She was crying at my son's grave. She had a child with her. My daughter hasn't left Sydney in weeks. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you're confusing her with someone else." "I'm not confusing her. The car had NSW plates, and the child is my grandson." Eleanor cut in, and for the first time, her voice sharpened like a blade. "My daughter's son and her husband's. A respectable man, an entrepreneur, not a small-town laborer." Shirley felt the blow, not to her pride, but deeper, in that place where mothers keep the memory of their children. Lachlan wasn't a small-town laborer. Lachlan was a man who went to work so his mother could eat, who sent money every fortnight without fail, who tied a red bandana around his neck and built walls under a sun that melted asphalt so others could live in houses he could never afford. But Shirley said none of that, because dignity isn't explained, it's shown. "I haven't come for money, ma'am," Shirley said. Her voice didn't tremble. "I've come for my son's blood." Eleanor pressed her lips together until they turned white. "Look, Mrs. Evans, I don't know who sent you or what you're looking for, but I'm going to tell you something clearly, so you don't waste any more of your time or mine. My family has no relationship with you or your son, and if you approach this house or my daughter again, I will call the police. Is that clear?" "It's clear to me that you're scared," Shirley said without raising her voice. "And people who have nothing to hide aren't scared." The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds. They were the 3 longest seconds of Shirley's life. "Get her out of here," Eleanor told the guard without looking back. She turned on her heel and started walking towards the house. The guard approached Shirley. He didn't touch her, but he stood so close she could smell his cheap deodorant under his uniform. "You heard the lady. Please leave." Shirley got up from the footpath, gathered her shopping bag, adjusted her shawl over her shoulders, and began walking towards the corner with the same calm with which she had arrived. But after 10 steps, she stopped, because the gate hadn't closed completely yet. The iron leaves moved slowly, heavy, automatic, and through the gap that remained open, Shirley managed to see the garden. It was green, absurdly green for a city in Australia's north, with grass cut like a carpet, shrubs with red flowers, and a stone fountain in the center where water fell with a sound that seemed from another planet. And there, by the fountain, was Liam. The child was playing with a toy car on the stone edge. He moved the wheels with his fingers, concentrated, oblivious to the adult world and its wars. He wore a clean white t-shirt and denim shorts, his feet bare on the grass. And 3 meters from him, sitting on a garden bench with a glass in her hand and eyes swollen from having cried all morning, was Chloe. Chloe looked up at the exact moment. Shirley glanced through the gap in the gate. Their eyes met. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a collision. Chloe opened her mouth. No sound came out, but Shirley read 3 things on her face at the same time: fear, shame, and something else. Something that looked like relief, as if Chloe had been waiting for someone to come looking for her. The gate closed with a metallic clang that echoed in the empty street. Shirley stared at the black iron. From the other side, she heard Liam's voice, muffled by the wall, talking to his toy car with that absurd seriousness children have when they play alone. Shirley reached into her pocket and touched the bandana. The fabric was warm from the sun. She wasn't leaving Sydney. Not yet. Not without that child. But now she knew something she hadn't known before. She wasn't the only one looking. On the other side of the wall, someone also wanted to be found. The question was whether Chloe would have the courage to open the door her mother had just closed. Shirley spent that night on a park bench closest to the Eleanor house. No one chased her away because in Vaucluse, the parks are so clean and empty at night that even the rangers don't bother checking them. She lay down, used her shopping bag as a pillow, and looked at the stars. They were the same stars visible from the homestead. But here they seemed more distant, as if even the sky moved away from ordinary folk. At 6 a.m., Shirley was already awake and sitting on the same footpath opposite the house. She didn't knock on the guardhouse. She didn't insist with the guard. She just sat and waited with the patience the Outback teaches. At 8, the gate opened. A silver car driven by a chauffeur came out. In the back seat, Shirley managed to see Mrs. Eleanor checking her phone. The car passed her without stopping. Eleanor didn't look at her, or pretended not to. It didn't matter. At 9, the same employee from the day before came out to sweep the footpath in front of the gate. Seeing Shirley, she stopped. "Ma'am, did you sleep here? I've slept in worse places." The employee looked inside the guardhouse. The guard was distracted with his phone. "Miss, Chloe goes to the San Augustine market every Tuesday. She takes the child. She leaves at 10. The employee lowered her voice until it was barely a whisper. Today is Tuesday. Shirley nodded once. She didn't say thank you with words. She looked into the employee's eyes, and the employee understood. The San Agustin market was unlike any market Shirley knew. There were no canvas stalls, no shouting vendors, no flies on the fruit. It was an enclosed, air-conditioned building where people bought imported cheeses and bread that cost what Shirley spent on beans for a week. But it was a public place, and in public places, there are no gates or guards to tell you that you don't belong. Shirley entered and sat on a bench in front of the juice fountain where she could see the main entrance. At 10:15, Chloe entered. She was alone with Liam. The child walked beside her, holding her hand, looking at everything with that voracious curiosity of a 3-year-old. Chloe wore dark glasses, her hair tied back, and simple clothes for what Shirley had already seen in that suburb. She seemed to want to go unnoticed. Shirley stood up. Chloe saw her from 5 meters away. She stopped dead. The color drained from her face. She looked around, searching for someone, perhaps hoping to see Eleanor, Damien, the guard. There was no one, just Shirley, standing by a bench with her shopping bag and worn thongs. "Please," Chloe said. Her voice broke from the first syllable. "Please don't do this here." "I didn't come to cause a scene, my dear," Shirley said, and that word, my dear, escaped from her soul without permission. "I just want to talk for 5 minutes. If after 5 minutes you want to send me away, I'll go and not come back." Chloe looked at Liam. The child observed Shirley with curiosity, without fear. 3-year-olds don't have a radar for social danger. They just see faces. And Shirley's face was a good face, wrinkled by the sun, weathered by the outback, but good. 5 minutes, Chloe said. They sat at a table at the back of the food court. Liam was entertained by a napkin Shirley folded into the shape of a chook, a trick she had taught Lachlan when he was the same age. The child took it, turned it, laughed. Chloe took off her dark glasses. Her eyes were red, not just from today, but from years. "I know who you are," Chloe said before Shirley could speak. "You're Lachlan's mum, and you're the woman who was crying at his grave." Chloe nodded. Her chin trembled. "That child is Lachlan's son?" The question hung over the table like smoke. Chloe closed her eyes. When she opened them, she was no longer holding anything back. Yes, a single word, 3 letters. And Shirley's world split in two and reassembled at the same time. "Tell me," Shirley said. "Tell me everything." And Chloe told her. She said she met Lachlan at a construction site her family's company was building on the outskirts of Sydney. She was there to supervise some finishes because she was studying architecture. Lachlan was building a wall under the July sun with the red bandana tied around his neck and his hands covered in mortar. They didn't speak that day, nor the next, nor the next. But on the 4th day, Chloe tripped over a cable, and Lachlan grabbed her arm before she fell. "Careful, miss," he said with a shy smile. And Chloe knew in that instant that she was lost. They met in secret for 8 months in cafes far from the city center, in parks where no one from her family went, in the small flat Lachlan rented with 3 other workers and which he cleared out for her on Sundays. Lachlan would cook her simple, hearty meals, and Chloe said she had never eaten anything more delicious in her life. "Lachlan used to tell me about you," Chloe said, looking at Shirley with shining eyes. "He used to say, you were the strongest woman in the world, that you lived alone on a homestead in the middle of nowhere and never complained. He told me he wanted to take me to meet you, but he first had to save money to fix up the house because he was embarrassed about how you lived." Shirley swallowed. Lachlan never told her anything, not a word. "Not a hint." "Why didn't you look for me when he died?" Shirley asked. Chloe looked down. "Because Damien forbade me," and there appeared the name Shirley didn't yet know, but which would change her life. Chloe recounted how Damien discovered their relationship. An employee at the site saw them together and gossiped. Damien arrived at Lachlan's flat one night. Chloe heard the shouting from the kitchen where she had hidden. Damien told Lachlan that if he didn't disappear from his sister's life, he would destroy his life, that he would have him deported, that he would invent a record for him, that he would make sure he couldn't find work anywhere, in Australia or anywhere else. Lachlan wasn't scared. He told Damien he loved Chloe and would fight for her. A week later, Lachlan was transferred to a site in remote Western Australia, a construction in the bush in a high-risk area with cheap materials and safety measures that existed only on paper. Damien signed the transfer order. He knew the conditions, he knew the risks, and he sent Lachlan anyway. The scaffolding collapsed on a Tuesday morning, Chloe said. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she did nothing to stop them. Lachlan and 2 other workers. The other 2 survived with injuries. Lachlan didn't. Shirley felt the table move. It wasn't moving. It was she who was trembling. "When I found out, I was already 2 months pregnant," Chloe continued. Damien took me to a private hospital where no one asked questions. He told me that if I said a word about Lachlan, he would destroy what little dignity remained of my son's name. He told me the baby would be born without a father and without a surname. He told me the only way to give him a future was to marry David, a business partner, a business marriage. David knew the truth, but the Eleanor name suited him, so he accepted. "And your mum?" Shirley asked. "Mrs. Eleanor, does she know?" Chloe shook her head. "My mum thinks Liam is David's son. Damien told her I had an affair with a worker on the site, but that he resolved it before it got out of hand. My mum thinks Damien saved me from making a mistake. She doesn't know that that mistake has a name, has dark eyes, and is 3 years old." Shirley looked at Liam. The child was still playing with the napkin chook, oblivious to everything. Oblivious that his entire life was a lie constructed by a man who believed that protecting meant controlling. "Chloe," Shirley said. Her voice was a thread but firm. "My son's death was an accident." Chloe looked her straight in the eyes. The site was classified as high risk. Damien knew. There were reports. Lachlan had no experience at heights. He had never worked on scaffolding. Damien sent him there knowing all that. It was on purpose. I don't know if he wanted him to die, but I know he didn't care if he died. Shirley closed her eyes, clenched her fists on the table until her knuckles turned white. She felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years of silent mourning. It wasn't sadness, it was fury. A black, hot fury that rose from her stomach to her throat like bile. Her son didn't die by bad luck. He didn't die because God willed it. He died because a rich man decided his life was worth less than a family's surname. When she opened her eyes, Chloe had something in her hands. She had taken it from her bag. It was a carefully folded fabric handkerchief. She placed it on the table and slowly unfolded it. Inside was a red bandana, not Shirley's. It was another, darker, more worn, with stains that time had not been able to erase. Stains of mortar, of sweat, of site dirt. "He was wearing it the day he died," Chloe whispered. "They gave it to me with his things at the hospital. I kept it. It's the only thing I have of him." Shirley looked at the bandana on the table, reached into her pocket, and took out hers. She placed it beside Chloe's. 2 red bandanas, 2 pieces of the same fabric, of the same life, separated by death and reunited on a rich market table by 2 women who loved the same man. Shirley took Lachlan's bandana with one hand, and with the other took Chloe's hand. "My dear," Shirley said, and this time the word didn't escape. She said it on purpose. "You are no longer alone." Chloe let out a sob, so deep that Liam looked up and stared at his mother with wide eyes. "Mummy, why are you crying?" Chloe wiped her tears and smiled at the child. "Because I'm happy, my love." Liam looked confused. Then he looked at Shirley and held out the napkin chook. "Here, Grandma, so you won't be sad too." Shirley took the paper chook, her hand trembling, and brought it to her chest as if it were gold. And at that moment, at a market table amidst the smell of expensive bread and the noise of people buying cheeses she would never taste, Shirley met her grandson. It took Chloe 2 days to gather the courage. 2 days during which Shirley slept on the park bench, ate cold tortillas with salt, and waited. She didn't pressure her. She didn't send messages. She knew that what Chloe was about to do was harder than anything she herself had done in 62 years of life. Because Shirley had faced the outback, poverty, solitude, but Chloe was going to face her own mother, and there is no desert harder than that. On Thursday at 9 a.m., Shirley received a call. Chloe had bought a disposable phone and given her the number at the market. "Come to the house. My mum is here. Damien isn't." He went to a site in regional NSW. It's now or never. Shirley washed her face at the park fountain. She smoothed her blue dress with her hands, replaited her hair, and walked towards the black iron gate. This time she didn't sit on the footpath. She knocked on the guardhouse. The guard looked at her with annoyance. "Ma'am, I already told you. Miss Chloe is waiting for me. Call her if you want." The guard hesitated. He dialed the intercom. 30 seconds later, the gate opened. Shirley crossed the threshold and stepped onto the green grass of the Eleanor house. She felt the grass under her thongs, fresh, wet from the sprinklers. At her homestead, grass was a seasonal rain miracle that lasted 3 weeks. Here, it was a permanent luxury. Chloe waited for her at the front door. She was pale but composed. She held Liam by the hand. The child saw Shirley and smiled. "The chook lady," Liam said. Shirley felt her chest fill with something warm. She stroked the child's head. "Hello, my love." "Come in," Chloe said. "My mum's in the living room." The Eleanor living room was larger than Shirley's entire homestead. Marble floors, cream leather sofas, museum-worthy paintings on the walls. Everything smelled clean, of fresh flowers, of money. And in the midst of it all, sitting with a straight back and an untouched coffee in her hand, was Mrs. Eleanor. Eleanor saw Shirley enter, and her expression hardened like setting concrete. "Chloe," Eleanor said without rising, "can you explain what this woman is doing in my house?" "Mum, I need you to listen to something, and I need you to listen until the end before you speak. I have nothing to listen to. I told you clearly that Liam is Lachlan's son." Chloe said it bluntly, without preamble, without softening, without preparing the ground. She let it drop like a stone into a deep well, and the silence that followed was the sound of that stone falling. Eleanor didn't move. The coffee trembled in her hand, but she didn't move. Her face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds: confusion, disbelief, and fury. "What did you say?" "Liam is not David's son. He's Lachlan Evans' son, the laborer from the site, the man Damien forced me to leave, the man who died." Eleanor put the coffee cup on the table with a sharp thud. She stood up. "You've lost your mind," Eleanor said. Her voice trembled, but not from fear, from rage. "This woman brainwashed you, sought you out, found you vulnerable, and filled your head with lies to get money. It's the oldest trick in the book, Chloe. I can't believe you're so naive. No one brainwashed me, Mum." "Then what? Are you going to tell me you've been lying to me for 3 years, 3 years looking me in the face? Every Sunday at family dinner with my grandson in my arms, knowing he was the son of a stranger. He wasn't a stranger. He was the man I loved." Eleanor turned to Shirley. Her eyes were 2 knives. You came to destroy my family. I don't know what you told my daughter. I don't know what evidence you invented. But I swear, if you don't leave this house right now, I'll make you regret ever crossing the outback." Shirley didn't back down, didn't raise her voice, didn't lower her gaze. She stood in the middle of that marble living room with her worn thongs and her blue dress, and said what she had come to say. "Mrs. Eleanor, I didn't come to destroy anything. I came to find what's left of my son, and what's left of my son is that child. That child is my grandson. He's mine too." The phrase hung between the 2 matriarchs like an invisible border. 2 women of the same age, with the same pain, from opposite worlds, claiming the same child. Eleanor took out her phone. "I'm calling Damien. He'll clear up this madness." "Call him," Chloe said. "Call him and ask him why he transferred Lachlan to the Western Australia site a week after discovering I was with him. Ask him why that site was classified as high risk. Ask him why Lachlan, who had never worked at heights, ended up on a 15-meter scaffold without a harness." Eleanor stopped, her phone halfway to her ear. She looked at her daughter as if seeing her for the first time. "What are you saying, Chloe?" "I'm saying Damien knew. He knew about Lachlan and me. He knew about the pregnancy and decided to solve the problem by sending him to a place where the chances of something going wrong were extremely high. Your brother would never do something like that. My brother did that and more. Mum, he forced me to marry David to cover up the shame. He made me sign papers that say Liam is David's son. He threatened to take Liam away from me if I spoke. I've been living in a prison with a garden and air conditioning for 3 years." Eleanor sank onto the sofa. The phone lay dead in her hand. Her face was no longer furious. It was that of someone whose floor is being moved from under their feet. "It's not true," Eleanor murmured. But she no longer sounded sure. She sounded like someone repeating one thing so they wouldn't have to believe another. "Look at the child, ma'am," Shirley said. Eleanor turned her head. Liam was sitting on the marble floor next to the coffee table, playing with a pencil. The adults shouting had made him nervous, and when Liam got nervous, he did what he always did. He took his right hand to his neck, closed his fingers as if gripping something, and pulled downwards the bandana gesture. Eleanor saw it. She didn't understand what it was, but she saw it. A strange, repetitive gesture that didn't fit anything. Shirley took Lachlan's photo at 18 from her pocket. She placed it on the table in front of Eleanor. Lachlan smiled with the red bandana around his neck, his right hand gripping the fabric, pulling it down. The same gesture, the same hand, the same tilt of the head. Eleanor looked at the photo, looked at the child, looked at the photo, looked at the child. "That gesture isn't taught, ma'am," Shirley said. "It's born, just like the eyes, just like the blood." Eleanor didn't answer, but Shirley saw something she didn't expect to see. She saw Mrs. Eleanor's eyes fill with water, not from rage, but from something worse, doubt. And doubt in a woman who has always had certainties is the beginning of a collapse. At that moment, the front door burst open. Damien entered the living room, his suit wrinkled and his tie loose, as if he had driven 3 hours non-stop from the regional site. Someone had warned him, perhaps the guard, perhaps the employee. It didn't matter. He was there. "What's going on here?" Damien said, looking at Chloe, then at Shirley, then at his mother. His voice was one of control, but his eyes showed alarm. "Damien," Eleanor said. Her voice was no longer that of a matriarch. It was that of a mother seeking the truth. "Did you send a worker named Lachlan Evans to the Western Australia site?" Damien's silence lasted a second too long. Just 1 second, but it was enough. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mum." "Yes, you do," Chloe said. "Chloe, this is ridiculous. Who is this woman? What did you tell Mum?" "I told her the truth, Damien. All of it." Damien looked at Shirley with contempt. He measured her up and down, just like the guard, just like Eleanor on the first day. But unlike them, in Damien's gaze, there was something more. There was fear. "Mum," Damien said, turning to Eleanor, "these people want money. It's a fabricated story. The woman from the outback is looking for a pension and used Chloe because she knows she's vulnerable. You can't believe her." "Damien," Eleanor's voice cut him like a knife. "Look me in the eyes and tell me you didn't know Chloe was pregnant with that young man when you transferred him." "That's a lie," Damien said without blinking. "I didn't know anything about any pregnancy. Transfers are decided by the operations department, not me." "Your signature is on the order, Damien," Chloe said. "I saw it. Dated September 7th, 9 days after you found out." Damien loosened his tie. A quick, nervous gesture. The living room was cold from the air conditioning, but sweat shone on Damien's forehead. "Mum, this is absurd. They're setting a trap for me, both of them. This woman comes from a lost town and suddenly knows dates. She has proof. Don't you realize it's a setup?" "Then tell me you didn't do it," Eleanor said. Her voice was no longer a knife. It was a whisper, and the whisper was worse. "Tell me you didn't know, and I'll believe you, but look me in the eyes when you say it." Damien looked at his mother, looked her straight in the eyes as she asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and what came out was not what he wanted to say. "Mum, I did what I had to do to protect this family." That phrase was the confession Damien didn't want to give, because he didn't say, "It's not true." He didn't say, "They're lying." He said, "I did what I had to do." And everyone in that room, including him, knew he had just betrayed himself. Eleanor stared at her son, her eldest son, the one who had carried the company since he was 25, the one she believed was the pillar of the family. And for the first time in her life, Mrs. Eleanor didn't know what to say. She slowly turned to Shirley, looked at her. There was no longer contempt, no longer fury. There was something Shirley recognized, because she had felt it herself many times. It was the pain of a mother who discovers her child is not who she thought he was. What happened in the following days was not an earthquake. It was something worse. It was the silence after the earthquake, when the cracks slowly open, and each one hurts more than the last. Eleanor didn't speak to anyone that night. She didn't have dinner. She didn't leave her room. She sat at the desk where her late husband used to sign construction contracts, and opened the company files that Damien kept in the cloud. Eleanor was not a tech-savvy woman, but she could read a legal document, like someone reads a recipe. She had spent decades signing balance sheets alongside her husband. It didn't take her long to find it. The transfer order for Lachlan Evans to the Western Australia site bore Damien's signature. The date was September 7th, exactly 9 days after an employee reported seeing Chloe with a worker from the Sydney site. Next to the order, there was a technical report classifying the Western Australia construction as a Level 3 risk zone. In that same report, with a red stamp no one could ignore, it stated that the scaffolding did not comply with federal regulations, and that 2 previous incidents had been reported on the same structure. Damien had read that report. He knew because in the margin, in his tight, nervous handwriting, there was a note that said, "Proceed. No budget to replace structure. Contractor's responsibility." Eleanor closed the computer, took off her glasses, and cried. She didn't cry for Shirley, or for Lachlan, or even for Chloe. She cried for herself because she realized that the son she trusted most, to whom she had entrusted the company and the family's future, had lied to her for 3 years, looking her in the eyes every Sunday at family dinner. And she cried because she knew she had helped, not out of malice, but out of blindness. She had looked the other way when Damien told her Chloe's affair was resolved. She had applauded the marriage to David without asking her daughter if she was happy. She had let the Eleanor name matter more than the truth. The next day, Eleanor called Damien to her office. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. No one else was present. When Damien came out, his face was gray and his hands were trembling. That same afternoon, the family's lawyers received instructions to restructure the company's management. Damien was removed from the administrative council. There were no shouts, no police, no public scene. It was a silent execution, carried out with the same coldness with which Damien had signed that transfer order. The justice of the wealthy makes no noise, but it hurts just the same. Chloe spoke with David that same week. The divorce was not difficult because the marriage had never been real. David signed the papers without a fight. Deep down, he too was tired of pretending. He took his surname and his businesses and left Chloe with the only thing that mattered, Liam. But the moment that changed everything was not Damien's downfall or Chloe's divorce. It was something smaller, quieter, more important. It was Eleanor knocking on the door of a cheap hotel in Sydney's city centre at 7 a.m. on a Friday, but she almost didn't make it. Eleanor got into the car that morning with the hotel address in her hand. The chauffeur started the engine. 3 blocks later, Eleanor told him to stop. She sat in the back seat, looking out the window without seeing anything for 5 minutes. She was about to say, "Take me home." She was about to convince herself that she could resolve this another way, with lawyers, with distance, with money, that she didn't need to go to that cheap hotel to sit in front of the woman who had told her the truth to her face while she had spat contempt. But then she remembered Liam's eyes, that neck gesture that now she couldn't stop seeing every time the child got nervous, and she told the chauffeur to continue. Shirley opened the door in her nightgown. She had spent 3 nights in that room that smelled of chlorine and damp, paid for with money Chloe had secretly given her, which Shirley only accepted because she had no other choice. Seeing Eleanor in the hallway, with perfect makeup but sunken eyes of someone who hadn't slept for days, Shirley didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. She stepped aside and let her in. Eleanor entered, looked at the narrow bed, the yellowish walls, the shopping bag on the plastic chair. She looked at the thongs by the door, looked at the red bandana folded on the pillow, and sat on the edge of the bed as if her legs could no longer support her. "I came to ask you one thing," Eleanor said. Tell me about Lachlan." Shirley looked at her. She looked for a trap. She looked for condescension. She looked for pity. She found none of that. She only found a 6'4" old woman who had run out of certainties and needed to hold on to something true. Shirley sat in the plastic chair opposite her and spoke. She told her about Lachlan as a child, running barefoot among the homestead saltbush. She told her about the red bandana she gave him when he was 6, a scrap from his grandfather's, and how Lachlan never took it off. She told her about the nights Lachlan studied by candlelight because there was no electricity, and how he learned to read from a recipe book that was the only book in the house. She told her about the day Lachlan told her he was going north, and how she didn't cry in front of him, because outback mothers don't cry in front of their children. They cry later, when the truck is gone and the dust settles. She told her that Lachlan sent money every fortnight without fail until he stopped sending it, and that she thought he had forgotten her, that the city had swallowed him, that he was no longer her son. She didn't know he was dead until a month later, when a social worker arrived with a cardboard box with his belongings. "In that box was the bandana I have here," Shirley said, touching the fabric on the pillow. "But Chloe had another, the one he wore the day he died. They are both the same because I cut them from the same cloth, one for me and one for him." Eleanor listened without interrupting. Tears ran down her cheeks, ruining the makeup she had so carefully applied that morning. "The man you despised," Shirley said without rancor, just with the naked truth. "He is the man who made your daughter happy, the only one, and he is the father of your grandson." Eleanor wiped her tears with a silk handkerchief, then looked at Shirley and said something that Shirley took a moment to process. "You raised a good man, Shirley, and I failed to see it." It was the first time Eleanor had called her by her name. Shirley felt something loosen in her chest, a knot that had been tight for days. It wasn't forgiveness yet. Forgiveness is slow and has its own timing, but it was the beginning. "And you cared for my grandson without knowing he was mine," Shirley replied. "That counts too." The two women looked at each other in that cheap hotel room, with sunlight streaming through a dirty window. They didn't embrace. It wasn't time for that. But something changed in the air between them. The wall was no longer there. Debris remained. Yes, pain, shame, lost years, but the wall was gone. "I want Liam to know you," Eleanor said, "as what you are, as his grandmother." "We are both his grandmothers," Shirley said. Eleanor nodded. For the first time, she nodded without effort, both of them. A month later, the dirt track to the town cemetery filled with dust for the second time that 15th of the month. But this time it wasn't Shirley alone with her bucket and wildflowers. There were 4. Shirley walked ahead with the firm step of someone who knew every stone on the path. Beside her, Chloe carried a bouquet of white daisies bought at the Broken Hill Market. Behind them, Mrs. Eleanor walked slowly, her unsuitable shoes for the dirt track, her heels sinking into the loose earth with each step, but without complaining. And between the three, with one hand holding his mum's and the other holding Shirley's, Liam walked, looking at everything with wide eyes. "Grandma, do lizards live here?" the child asked, pointing to a crack in the earth. "Everything lives here, my love," Shirley said. "Lizards, scorpions, snakes, and people too, hard as it is to believe." Eleanor looked at the cemetery upon arrival, the wooden and concrete crosses, the barbed wire, the dusty gum trees. She looked at Lachlan's grave with the hand-painted letters. She said nothing, but Shirley saw her press her lips together and swallow something she didn't want to release in front of anyone. Chloe knelt in front of the headstone and placed the daisies. Liam let go of his grandmother's hands, approached the cross, and placed something on the earth. It was the napkin chook Shirley had made for him at the San Agustin market. He had kept it all that month, wrinkled and torn at the edges, but he had kept it. "It's for Daddy," Liam said, "so he won't be alone." Shirley took the two bandanas from her pocket, hers and Lachlan's, and tied them together to the concrete cross. The red fabric moved in the outback wind like a tiny flag, like a heart beating where nothing should beat anymore. Eleanor approached Shirley. They both stood in front of the grave, shoulder to shoulder, the homestead woman and the mansion woman, thongs and heels sinking into the same earth. "It's a beautiful place," Eleanor said, looking at the vast outback sky. Shirley glanced at her sideways. She knew Eleanor wasn't referring to the cemetery. She was referring to the world Lachlan came from, the world she had despised without knowing it, the world that had raised the man her daughter loved. "Yes," Shirley said, "it's a beautiful place." Liam sat on the ground between the two grandmothers, playing with the stones on the ground, humming a song no one had taught him. And the four people who remained of Lachlan Evans in this world stood there in silence, letting the outback wind say what words no longer could. Sometimes one thinks that when a child dies, everything dies, that the world ends, and what remains is just routine, just aimless walking until it's one's own turn. Shirley thought that for 3 years. 3 years talking to a grave. 3 years believing Lachlan had taken everything with him. But Lachlan didn't take everything. He left the most important thing. He left a pair of dark eyes on a child's face who brings his hand to his neck when he gets nervous. He left a love that survived fear, lies, and distance. And he left a lesson that his own mother was slow to learn, that blood doesn't care for surnames, or money, or sandstone walls. Blood finds its way, always finds its way. If you know what it's like to lose someone and find them where you least expected, tell us your story in the comments. Subscribe for more stories like this, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, all it takes for life to change is a 15th of the month, an outback cemetery, and a child who speaks the truth without knowing he's speaking it.